Welcome to The Thrifters, or How Vintage Clothing Saved My Life with Amanda Walker-Storey. I'm your host, Amanda. And with me is my sound guy, my husband, my biggest fan, my biggest supporter, Ben Walker-Storey.
Hello.
Hello. So here we are. We have finally taken the dive on a new podcast. We're kind of veteran podcasters, I would say, at this point. We've been doing different podcasts now for a few years and recording ourselves talking since pretty much...
Since infancy.
Well, since we first met.
That's true, a little bit.
And now we're going to have a different topic, and that topic is going to be vintage clothing, thrifting, estate sales, reselling, kind of everything surrounding the world of secondhand, if you will. Mm-hmm. We had one episode of the Cheap Chills podcast, our former podcast. One of our most popular episodes was talking about vintage clothing. Mm-hmm. And that is what is inspiring this new podcast, The Thrifters.
And for this one, I was thinking we could start by asking you some of the questions, that I have, because I'm getting started a little bit, just as a little side fun thing. And since this is the first episode, might as well, start by talking about how to get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, I was thinking how vintage clothing saved my life, because, I feel like it did for you, for us.
Mm-hmm,
you want to start by talking about that a little bit?
I mean, yeah, it's all very fresh, as in just a few days, but how vintage clothing saved my life. So I have been basically working 2 full-time jobs now for
3 years?
4 years. I have been working remote from home for a beauty company as a customer support person, and also running my vintage business full-time. And got the news last Friday, very suddenly. Basically got a phone call from my boss that was like, today's your last day. Basically no buffer, no like, hey, we're going to give you a week, 2 weeks, nothing. Sure. Today's the last day. So of course, immediate anxiety, because it's like, it's a change and it's scary. But at the same time, I know I'm going to be okay. And that is because I have been building and nurturing my own business for several years now. And I know that I'm absolutely capable of making money. Now, will I be making the equivalent of what I was making at the salary job? Probably not at first, but I think I absolutely can get close or even exceed over time the amount of money I was making. So I think that is how vintage saved my life, because I'm not left high and dry.
And we're talking about replacing a Bay Area tech company type salary.
Yeah, a big salary with health insurance. It's a chunk of money, and it's been nice to have it, but there were aspects of the job that were absolutely not enjoyable. And in that aspect, I'm really glad to be moving forward. I knew that this day was going to come. I knew it wasn't a forever thing, like many tech kind of startup jobs and companies are. But, it's still sudden and it's still a change. It's still scary, but I'm not panicking because I have this other skill set.
And so there's a lot of people out there who are going through similar things. A lot of people have been out of work and had to figure out ways to hustle on their own in the last couple of years because of the pandemic. And I think that it's a good time to sort of share this story to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all grew up with this myth that in order to be a successful person and in order to thrive, you had to do this really set track of you have to go through school. And then as soon as you're out of school, you have to do, I don't know, I'm just going off of what my sort of, what people told me. You have to do the 2 years of community college, and then you have to go and transfer to a 4-year college. And then you have to be an intern and get abused for several years. And you have to, pay your dues, as they say.
Above all, I feel like people in both of our families really have subscribed to you must have a job to be secure. You must have an employer at as big a company as possible. And that's like the only way to feel secure in life.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And a lot of people, at least in our age bracket, have absolutely felt like that. And we've all been, conditioned to believe that that's the path that you have to follow. And I think for us, we've been working independently, working from home, freelancing, self-employment for a long time. But I think during the pandemic, people really had to get creative. And I think during the pandemic, people really started thinking about things more intensely and about like the joy that was coming into their lives and realizing like, man, I'm slaving over here for a boss who does not care about me. I'm absolutely replaceable. And like, how can I be more fulfilled with what I'm spending most of my life doing? And people started getting creative and finding new ways to make money. And I think slowly I don't like saying hustle culture because it feels kind of like, no, it's like you're actually working. And I think it trivializes the actual work a little bit. Like, no, we're actually creating new job markets. We're creating our own path. And so I think, now as the pandemic slowly winds down, all of a sudden these big corporate jobs are like, nobody's coming back. People are quitting. They're calling it this mass resignation or whatever, because people are finding that, oh, wait, I can actually make money doing something I like doing. I don't have to do a 9 to 5 every day. I don't have to like sit at a meeting with people I don't really like and never take a day off.
Right.
So, I have not had that many jobs, honestly. When I take a job, I tend to stay with my job and really try to be as ambitious as I can. I've always been the type of employee who is like, okay, so I'm here. I'm just going to be the best at what I do, whether that's selling the most, being, the most successful, bringing new ideas to the table. That's just like who I am naturally. And so when I left my role after 15 years in cosmetics, I left to kind of do freelancing. At the time, I was making a lot of money writing for Yahoo. And that was there. And I was like, I'm going to leave this 9 to 5 toxic culture job that never gives me time off, that I have to like beg to get a holiday. I'm not happy here. It's consuming all of my life, all of my time. I'm going to leave and I'm going to do this freelance thing. So I resigned from that job. And everybody there was like, you're crazy. You're leaving behind this like high hourly plus commission. You've got job security. You, seniority, you get health insurance. You're leaving all of this behind for something unknown. But at that time, it felt like the best choice for my own mental health and my own growth. Fast forward to leaving that job, and immediately Yahoo shuts down the division that I was working in. Something unexpected happened and things changed. And all of a sudden, that job that I was leaving to do is no longer a job anymore. So yeah, absolutely. Feeling scared, stressed out. What am I going to do? And then I was pregnant. Mm-hmm. So super scary, double scary. So, I've been buying and selling and thrifting clothing since forever, like really since forever. My mom was an avid thrifter, kind of learned it from her. Also loved going to garage sales, just like have always enjoyed secondhand, vintage, antiques, old things. And as a teenager, used to thrift all the time for my clothes, partly out of necessity of not having a lot of money to buy cool clothes, but also because I just enjoyed finding really weird, cool things that nobody else had. But as far as like reselling as an income, it did start with selling off my own wardrobe that didn't fit me anymore after having our son. I had a bunch of really cool vintage clothing, and I didn't want to keep these like ghosts of clothing, ghosts of figure past in my closet. It was like, okay, like don't really think my skeleton's going to be shrinking to a former size. So let's like sell through this stuff. And so I started doing that and was pretty successful at doing that pretty quickly, selling on Facebook primarily. I had an Etsy shop, and I think it was 2015, 2016, sold a few things on Etsy, but it was not a primary focus. It was just kind of trying it out. I was mostly selling on Facebook, and yeah, like surprised how easy it was to make money, really.
And that wasn't the marketplace where people come to your doorstep and give you cash. It was
Facebook groups, selling groups. So vintage clothing groups. And I actually think you shared with me a Facebook group and was like, look at this cool Facebook group. And it was a buying, selling vintage clothing group. And I joined that group, and I still probably sell a majority of my older vintage on that group to this day on Facebook.
If somebody was just starting out, maybe they got stuff in their closet, or maybe like their grandma left them some clothing. What could we say about, getting started?
I mean, if you have things in your closet or that you've inherited that you're unsure of the date or the era or how to describe it or anything like that, there's so many free and readily available resources online. Like, you can type into Google how to date vintage clothing, and a zillion people have written blogs on this. So the information is out there to find easily. I couldn't really begin to tell a person exactly how,
Sure.
because you can easily, there's so many clues. I think zippers is a big one. Obviously, labels.
Just knowing whether something is vintage or not is kind of the big sort of equator of.
It is. And it can be especially hard now when there's so much retro stuff there. There's so many even fast fashion brands making vintage inspired things that it can be tricky. You can,
Yeah.
I mean, even I go into a thrift store sometimes and I will pick something up and be certain that it's a vintage. And then you got to flip it inside out. You got to look at the textures and the fabrics and the seams and the zippers and the labels. You really have to be sort of, you really have to investigate and look at something quite carefully to make those decisions. And then again, going on Google, checking out what label it is, searching things. There's just so much that you can do really easily, but it isn't an easy thing to do. It does take a long time to get really skilled at it, but I think probably the main thing is zippers and labels, I would say, first off.
Yeah, let's get into some sort of easy tells in a bit. We won't forget to talk about that, but maybe to start, we could talk about, say you got some stuff in your closet and you know it's vintage. What do? You want to sell it online.
Okay, so you have to figure out what platform you want to do this on. And again, there's so many platforms now that you can do this on. You can have a Depop app for selling. You can list on Facebook Marketplace. You can list in a Facebook clothing group. You can open your own Etsy shop. You can put it on Craigslist if you want. You can do, I just feel like there's eBay even.
Right.
There's so many platforms. So you have to really decide what you want to try out. I will say one thing that you should just be prepared for, unless you're meeting someone in person to hand them money and they're taking the thing away, you got to pay fees. There are going to be fees associated with any kind of selling online, whether that's PayPal fees because you're doing buyers and sellers protection because you're selling something to someone on a Facebook group or on Etsy. There's just always fees associated with selling. And I think that early on, it's a good idea to just get comfortable with that.
Yeah, I just feel okay with it. And, I just feel like if you're going to be flirting with the idea of selling, secondhand stuff, clothes, whatever, I just feel like the audience that you're speaking to right now is realistically 90% women. Mm-hmm. So I would just feel like maybe don't put things on Craigslist and meet people behind the 7-Eleven.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, always obviously safety first. And personally, like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist are not anything I'm going to get involved in, not only for safety reasons, but just because like it's super flaky. You're going to spend a lot of time messaging back and forth with people and setting up times and getting people who ghost you. Like, it's really not the best. It's not the best way to spend your time.
Yeah. As somebody who's done a bit of both, like to get rid of our old couch or whatever, that was a nightmare. And then having just opened an Etsy shop, it is so much easier to spend the $7 or whatever and put the thing in the box and print out a label and just take it to the post office and you're done with it and the order is fulfilled and you've got the money and it's over and there's not all that back and forth and trying to meet somebody in person. I definitely would discourage that in general.
Yeah. I mean, unless we're talking about, selling in person at markets or flea markets or kind of pop-up shops and stuff like that, which is a whole
That's
other
different.
thing.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. But selling in person isn't really anything I do right now. It's primarily online.
So, as somebody who just started an Etsy shop, Green Apple Dirties, you haven't mentioned yours yet.
Right. So my Etsy shop is Irreverent Finery, all one word. And my shop's been open since 2016. And then in 2019, I had Irreverent Finery on Instagram. It was just kind of like, whatever. I don't know. It's just a thing I had up. And then in 2019, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to grow this account. When I started trying to grow that account, I had 400 followers. And I had like my own, I was mostly posting on my own private account at that time. And so I decided to switch gears, and I saw a lot of people having success on Instagram, not necessarily people just selling, but just like the community and becoming more well-known and trusted and sharing your content and sharing your point of view and developing relationships with clients and driving your business to your Etsy shop. And I felt like that was a good way to spend my time, is trying to grow my business there. And I just hit 4,000 followers, which is not a ton, but I've only been doing this like seriously for like 2 years.
Yeah.
So I feel like even though I'm not 10K or, like some of the bigger accounts, I've earned every follower.
And there's never going to be a number that makes a person feel better about their lives or anything.
No. Like honestly, and I've said this before, talking to people on Instagram, like any person who likes your thing and sees it is like a huge win, because it's such a giant like platform of people. They can see anything. There's like, to be seen on Etsy or Instagram at all feels like a small miracle, really.
So you would recommend, if somebody's starting out, go ahead and just come up with a name. Don't agonize over it. But that could be a whole other subject for another episode. But the naming. But go ahead and grab an Instagram, right?
Yeah, I think that it's a good place to not only build your own business, but really see how other people are doing business. Because I think I really grew and learned a lot just looking at other people's accounts, looking at other people's Etsy shops. How do they present their clothing? How do they describe their clothing? What kind of keywords do they use? And it's like, I know people might say like, oh, that's copying, but it's like, no, you're looking at people's stuff and being like, hey, I like what they're doing.
No, getting tips and following successful people is how we all succeed.
Right.
It's not plagiarism. Don't copy down people's, biographies or anything, or take their profile picture. That's copying. But just seeing what you like about the people who are doing well and what you don't like about other things is natural.
Yeah. And I think that it's really totally fine to kind of cherry pick from many accounts that you enjoy and kind of create your own presence on all the platforms that you're going to be on, and what you look like and what you feel like you want to show to the world. And I would say, like, for the people who are starting out, probably for me, the number one best tip that I can give for not only having a vintage business, or I guess what I'm trying to say is, first and foremost, just like, what's your point of view? What is your point of view? What is your like aesthetic? What is it that you enjoy? And then you put that out there, because as long as you do that, nobody else is going to be like you.
Right. And that goes toward like the idea of sourcing.
Yes.
But say you're just starting with a few things like I have. Like I had a few things hanging around that I'd grabbed at estate sales or from my own collection. And we're talking about starting out that way. And then I got the Etsy shop. What can we do what does somebody do to make sure they have a good, start on Etsy?
I think to have a good start on Etsy, you need to have good photos. And I don't mean you need to go buy a Canon DLSR or whatever you call them. You can use an iPhone, clear, non-blurry, fairly well lit, even if it's just outdoors, photos of your item, clearly like showing all aspects of it. Front, back, sides, inside, labels, closures,
Flaws.
flaws. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. The pictures of the things, I think at the end of the day, are what are really going to sell your whatever you're selling. Description, yes, clear, concise descriptions of what you have. If you can properly date it, get it as close as you can, research it. That's important as well. And clearly disclosing all flaws. I try not to get too flowery with my descriptions. I do sometimes like to talk about like how that thing makes me feel, because sometimes people see something and they don't necessarily see your point of view about it or why you bought it or why it's in your shop. And you can kind of say like, hey, I'm getting this kind of vibe, or this is how I would style it. Like put your own spin on it. Clear measurements, whatever it is, full measurements. And I think one of the reasons, and actually some of the feedback that I've gotten from my buyers is like, I don't make people have to work for the listing that they're interested in buying from me. I want to give them all of the information up front as clearly as I can, so they can look at my photos, look at my description, look at my measurements and be like, great, I want to buy that. Sometimes if someone needs, additional special measurements that are a little bit more specialized, they can still, message me, but I don't want someone to have to like comment or message me to ask me a bunch of questions about something. I want them to feel like it's all out there up front and I can just buy it. It's easy.
Right. That makes sense. One of the things that tripped me up when I was getting started that can dovetail back into our sourcing conversation is Etsy has like sort of menu questions, and they need to all line up in order to sort of prove that it's a vintage item, or it's not going to allow you to sell. It'll give you like error messages. And that threw me off. I had to come asking you about that. So it was, what date is it that is considered vintage on Etsy?
Well, industry standard for vintage is anything that is 20 years old or older. And then anything that is 100 years old or older is considered an antique. So for Etsy, you can put anything from year 2000 and older. And then if they are newer things, those are considered like a handmade good. And then you have to provide a lot of information about these handmade goods. You basically have to be the maker, talk about your partners, your manufacturing. So if you're looking to sell things that are not 20 years old or older, you need to look at another platform like Depop or Poshmark. Mercari, I think, or Facebook groups. There are definitely Facebook groups for new items as well.
Yeah, that tripped me up because I bought like a Lotus polo shirt from like their race crew or whatever. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great on Etsy. But it's probably from like 2010. So Etsy wouldn't allow me to sell it. So now I know that sort of thing. Either don't buy or put it on Mercari or one of my other platforms like that. But it does get back into the question of sourcing and what are some basic things that you could keep in mind that would tell you this is definitely not vintage or this definitely is vintage when you're at the thrift store, garage sales?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and maybe this has developed over time, I'm not sure, but I'll just speak to how I shop. I really scan a rack, and I have a lot of experience going pretty far back. I did go to fashion school, and I really fell in love with fashion history. I love to read. I love looking at magazines, old pictures, old movies. Like, it's something I'm very passionate about. So I feel like I have a little bit more of an experience with something like what colors were popular in the 1960s. You think about the avocado greens and the psychedelic colors and patterns. So I feel like when I'm shopping, I kind of look at a rack and shop with my eyes first. Hey, let me grab that thing that looks like it kind of looks like a 60s print, and I'll pick it up. And oh my gosh, nope, that's a LuLaRoe pair of leggings. And then, because it's like, either has a label or just using a retro pattern. I also feel like fabrics, you can really tell the difference between a cheapo polyester Target, Walmart shirt versus something that's more substantial, feels like a thicker, nicer fabric.
So you're touching it and using
touching.
your fingers for judges.
Yeah, I mean, you can run your hands across a rack.
That feels like it takes a lot of trial and error. And I was hoping that there would be some sort of basics. Like if I'm trying to find something that you might like and you're not at the thrift store that day, I'll probably start because a lot of stuff trips me up. I will look at the garment and be like, oh, for sure, that's old because of what you were saying, like Forever 21 and Target and so many brands are making things that are purposefully, they look like they're from the 50s or 60s or whatever. So I'll grab something and be like, well, this one for sure. And the thing that will make me put it back is looking at the tag.
Yeah.
And if it looks just kind of, you can get a sense for whether a tag looks new or there's an old fashioned worn out logo on it, then you got some hope. But if it says that it's made in certain countries, I'm going to put it back.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually probably you're better to speak on this because, I'm kind of far removed from not knowing or being tripped up now. So it's hard for me to be like, oh, well, what do I do? I'm just like, boom, I know.
So if a tag says made in China, made in Indonesia, is there any situation where it'd be like, well, still, this is worth something, or is it just best to put those back?
I think that when you're looking at made in China, I think that that's probably going to be, you're going to see some 90s and then later, because in the 80s, it was very big. Everything people wanted made in the USA. So if you find something that has like a very specific made in the USA tag, it's usually 80s. So that's like an identifying piece. People were really focused in during that time on buying things made in the USA. And then slowly as things changed, made in China became acceptable. And then, there is still some value to some things made in China. I sell a lot of 90s stuff. I sell a lot of Y2K era stuff.
So I guess basically what I'm asking is if it looks really old, like, oh, wow, I could picture like Twiggy wearing this. It's got giant polka dots, and it's a mini skirt, and you pick it up and it says made in China. It's not from the 60s.
No, it's not from the 60s. And I guess you're right on target there. Probably the most recognizable aspect of finding vintage would be a label, but a lot of things don't have labels. Like a lot of things. They get lost to time, or they could even be handmade and don't have a commercial label inside. So while it's really nice to find a label, you can't be reliant on labels. And so that's when you get into learning about different closures. You can, look and see, does something have a metal zipper? If it has a metal zipper, could be like 60s and before. But then there are always variables, because if someone, had a metal zipper sitting around in the 80s that's been in their grandma's sewing basket for 20 years and they they need a new zipper, and then they put this metal zipper on this 80s thing, it doesn't make it 60s. It's still an 80s thing with the metal zipper that is from the 60s. So you have to really, it's like forensics, you have to really like think about all these different factors. Where the zipper is placed. Is it on the side? Things that have like a side metal zipper are usually like 40s and 50s. Does it have snaps on the side or little like hook and eye closures? That could be 30s, but there is no like end all be all with dating these things.
And there's no app.
There's no app. There's no like, this is it. No matter what, if I look at and find this thing, this means it's 40s or 50s.
Okay, well, that brings up a lot of questions that we can dig into. Maybe we should take a quick break before we dig into the minutiae of, not the minutiae, that sounds trivial, the deep dives.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a quick break.
Have you heard of Instacart Business? It's a new way to stock up on supplies, fresh ingredients, and last-minute items delivered in as fast as 1 hour. Whether you run an office, restaurant, or store, you can get what you need from over 1,200 retail brands, with delivery that moves as fast as you do. Sign up for Instacart Business, and for a limited time, get free delivery and 2% credit back for 1 year with a free Instacart Plus trial. Visit instacart.com/business to redeem. Instacart Plus trial for new users while supplies last. Plan renews at $99 per year. $250 credit back minimum. Excludes alcohol. Terms apply. Have you heard of Instacart Business? It helps you take on Monday with office supplies, snacks, and last-minute items delivered in as fast as 1 hour. And with access to over 1,200 retail brands, you can get your team's favorites, even their break room coffee. Get delivery that moves as fast as you do. Sign up for Instacart Business, and for a limited time, get free delivery and 2% credit back for 1 year with a free Instacart Plus trial. Visit instacart.com/business to redeem. Instacart Plus trial for new users while supplies last. Plan renews at $99 per year. $250 credit back minimum. Excludes alcohol. Terms apply.
I think a lot of people who are, interested in fashion, it can get label based for them. If it's not designer, it's not worth anything. That doesn't seem like that's how you roll.
Yeah, I mean, there's truth to that. I think when we're talking about vintage fashion, if you find, a vintage Chanel piece, you're still going to be super excited because it does increase its value when it is a designer and it's also vintage. So you're not going to be turning your nose up at any designer labels, but it becomes less important if the piece is cool and if it's well made and if it is rare. And then in vintage, there's just this whole other genre of designers that nobody really knows about that are super trendy and popular for vintage people to buy and to sell. There's like an ebb and flow of trends in vintage that doesn't really apply to anything that's going on out like in high fashion. You're not going to see the same, it's not trickling down like, oh, I saw so-and-so walk on the runway. Doesn't really apply in vintage clothing. People are more interested in their own sort of subculture of fashion. I think that there are definitely people that talk about this stuff, and there are definitely people that keep their business, their point of view, their sourcing, their information very close and don't share. But there's a lot of readily available information. And I think if someone's starting out and wants to dive into reselling vintage, watch a bunch of videos. There's so much available. Read blogs.
Hey, do you mean YouTube?
Yeah,
or?
YouTube videos. Even on Instagram, people do reels about this stuff. And, there's just start reading and looking at what other people are doing and then figure out like where you fit into that. I think when I first started, I was just scared to make a mistake. Mm-hmm. I was scared like, oh, what if I don't know the difference between this 1970s thing and 1960s thing. It's 10 years. It's a whole decade. It could be a totally wrong decade. And I made a lot of mistakes and people corrected me. Some people were kind. Some people were not very kind.
But you were never canceled.
But I was never canceled. I made mistakes and I handled my mistakes graciously. I didn't get, butthurt when someone told me I was wrong. I was like, oh man, thanks for telling me. Like, being open and flexible to being wrong and to taking in new information and learning is really key to having success in this industry because it is like no one can be an expert. Like there are people with PhDs in fashion history who do this. They're scholars in fashion and they're still learning. So you can't expect yourself to never make a mistake as, an Instagram vintage seller.
And that goes to your other point that you mentioned earlier about like finding your niche, kind of niching down on looks and types of clothing in order, at least you could have some expertise that way, right?
Yeah, I think you have to figure out like what your point of view is, what really speaks to you, like what you like, and then provide that. And then people get to know your point of view. I mean, I guess my point of view on social media is so strong that people feel like they know me enough to tag me on vintage clothing that other people are selling because they're like, oh, I know Amanda would love this. Yeah. And they're usually right. And that's really helpful because then your customers can really get to know your aesthetic as well and be like, yeah, that's a person I probably want to buy stuff from because they're selling things that I like too. And they get to know you. And I think especially in this day and age, people want to buy from people. They don't want to buy from a big nameless anonymous brand. They like supporting people. And I think that when you're putting stuff out there that you truly love, that you're like excited about, it really shines. It cuts through the noise and like the crowding of the Instagram platform and it touches people and it inspires them to follow you and to buy from you. And even if they're not buying from you, to engage with you on social media, to DM you and talk about stuff. Like that's part of the fun too.
Who are buyers? Is it just people? Is it a lot of people who buy and sell? What's the demographic?
Gosh, I think that it's changing. Like currently, for the longest time, most of my buyers were also sellers. There were people who just love vintage, and so they're buying and selling. And I think that being a buyer who also sells feels less risky because you're like, man, if this thing doesn't work out after a while, I change my mind and don't want it anymore, easily I can just resell it. So it feels like you're constantly just kind of cycling through stuff and you're not making a huge investment in something that's going to sit in your closet forever. You have the skill set to be able to move it along. But now I'm seeing a lot of younger people who are interested in secondhand and vintage. And like I was saying with Y2K, these are clients who are teenagers and in their 20s who are buying prom dresses that I wore when I was in high school. And that's exciting to see because I know when I was in high school, it was not cool to wear thrift store clothes.
Yeah.
But the stigma of like not having money or, not the stigma of only, being the cool kid who bought the expensive brand name stuff from the mall, it seems to not be as important anymore. So I'm seeing younger customers. I think I read a statistic the other day that said 70% of Americans look for something secondhand first. And then if they can't find it, they go to buy it, new. And that's a huge deal. Environmentally, just like with the amount of stuff that's being made and that's already out in the world, like that's a win.
Yeah, I guess I think about that too. The more older I get, like it feels like, oh, I'm going to buy this thing when you're young. It's my thing now. But as you get older, you're like, this is only going to be my thing for so long. And then it's going to be probably garbage. Maybe it'll go one more round of somebody wanting it at my estate sale, but probably most of it becomes garbage pretty quick. So secondhand is good.
Yeah, secondhand is good. And then also just making more responsible purchases and really thinking about when you're making a purchase, like not thinking about it like, oh, I'm going to wear this for a while and then I'm just going to donate it. Because like, don't you feel like Goodwill is people's trash can now where they're just like, take it to Goodwill. It's not, I don't have it in my house anymore. It's disappeared into the vapors.
If you have doubts about that, go into any thrift store in the world and count how many Chevy's birthday hats are in there.
Seriously. Yeah. So thinking about clothing and your investments in a different way. And like, I mean, I feel like I saw a meme that, doesn't really resonate with us personally, but it was like, think of clothing like a tattoo. It's a thing that's going to be around and with you. What kind of investment are you making? This thing is, you need to not just think of it as disposable and then I'm going to toss it away and it's going to just disappear. It's going to be on this earth. It's going to be here for a long time. So what am I buying? Like, what am I investing my money in and what am I keeping around?
Being a good buyer and a good seller kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah. And also like normalizing mending things and sewing things that are damaged, and also normalize not just buying whatever, but buying things that are really good quality and maybe spending a little more money if you can, but buying less. Buying a thing that's going to last you a long time and that that you're going to fix and wear and, repair as needed. I think that a good place to start is, like you said, in your own closet. And maybe that's not vintage at first. Maybe that's open up a Depop account.
What is Depop?
Depop is an online selling app. So it's a little more casual than Etsy, although I think Etsy just bought Depop. But you can list anything, any kind of clothing on there.
That's the one that's more like Instagram, but with price tags on everything, basically?
Yeah, exactly. I had a Depop account before I was active on my Etsy account. And I sold vintage on there, but I also sold stuff from my own closet. I also, for a while, was selling like makeup on there. You can sell a lot of things on there. But that might be a good place to start. You can link it to PayPal and get your payments through PayPal.
Just getting used to all the PayPals and the pricing and writing descriptions of whatever it is that you need to do.
I don't think that it's a good idea to, go to the thrift store and try to find vintage and make a big investment. I think it's a good idea to sort of look at what you have that you're willing to part with and then try it out. Like, oh, let me see how I would describe this thing and, put it online and see what the response is. And there's just a lot more to selling online than just putting it up and then collecting the money. You know, you have to also ship the thing.
Get good at packaging it
You
up.
have to get good at packaging it. You have to ship in a timely manner. You can't just like take someone's money and then, 3 weeks go by and you're like, I guess I'll ship. There's a responsibility that goes along with doing this type of work, and you have to be ethical and you have to be, responsible. And some people are up for that and some people might not be. So like, is it going to be for you? You don't want to make a huge investment and be like, I'm not really feeling this,
Do you have to be ethical? I think that's another one to write down as a subject for an entire
That's an entire
episode,
show.
because there's going to be a spectrum in everything, but there's definitely people who have different ethics and things that they find important or are willing to fudge.
Yeah. I was actually surprised by how much ethics plays into my role as a vintage seller every single day in many, many different ways. And like you said, that's an entirely different show. But I think if you want to be respected and you want to be a successful seller and you want people to continue to come back and buy from you and tell their friends to buy from you, ethics is incredibly important. And like I said, that can be something as simple as shipping something within the time frame that you said you were going to ship it. Keeping those deadlines and sending and describing things and sending them in a good condition and clean and without holes and stains.
Yeah. Or having close-ups of the holes.
Yeah, or describing them, disclosing them, all of those things. But it's a small community. So if you are not an ethical seller, you're not going to make it.
That's what I was just going to say. Every industry is a small industry, small enough to where you can't afford to jerk people around, be dishonest, be a jerk, and sort of, quote, get away with it. Your reputation gets out way faster than you could ever imagine, and suddenly you'll find yourself like out.
Yeah, not only will your reputation be ruined and people will talk about it and they will absolutely tell people not to buy from you, but you don't want to get a PayPal dispute. You do not want someone to put a charge back on their purchase and then they will keep the thing and they will get their money back, and then you won't be able to use PayPal or you'll get banned from different payment platforms and then you can't do business. So it's to everyone's best interest to just like, if you're going to do it, commit to being a good seller with good ethics and to follow through. And that's what, even circling back to paying the fees, paying the fees.
Not trying to skirt it and say, we're friends.
If you want to be like a real business, if you want to, do this as your job, you have to treat it like a job from the jump off.
I like to, with this sort of thing, with writing descriptions and disclosing flaws and all of it, I like to imagine myself tied up in Wonder Woman's magic rope.
Her lasso of truth.
Yes, and Linda Carter's specifically.
Yeah, specifically, of course.
I mean, I'm usually thinking about that anyway, but it helps when I'm reselling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look, the smallest thing someone is going to notice, they are giving you their money and they want to know what they're paying for. And I try to think of myself also because I'm, before I was ever a seller, I was a buyer. And so I see everything. And I am, even if it's something small, even if I keep the garment with the small flaw that was not disclosed, chances are I might not buy from you again. And I might not even tell you. I might not say like, hey, there was like a small snag, but it's noted in the brain vault where
Sure.
I'm like, yeah, they missed that, And look, I've plenty of times reached out to people and said like, hey, you missed this or missed that. Some people are very gracious about it. Some people are like, well, it's vintage. You should expect that, which is not true. But people's experience with you sticks around. And they're going to remember how they felt when they opened that package. And if they saw a big stain on it that you didn't tell them about, they're going to be pretty bummed out.
Right. The other learning curve that is new for me, for the most part, really, is measuring. And I think that is something for being a good seller and a good buyer, is understanding how garments are measured. And there's basically an industry standard for where you put the tape and from here to here and there to there, and getting that all right when you're buying or selling.
Yeah, I think that there's two pieces to this. There's providing full, accurate measurements to your customer who's buying something from you that they can't try on. And there's no like fudging it, because when they get it, if you messed up, and I have messed up, if they get it and it doesn't fit, you can't be like, oh, sorry, I measured wrong. They're going to be like, hey, I want to send this thing back and I want my money back. You made a mistake. And you have to, suck it up and be like, yeah, I made a mistake. But the other piece of this is like, really just take your measurements and know what your measurements are as a buyer. Yeah. Don't guess. Don't, remember your measurements from a year ago. Like, measure yourself right then before you commit to making a purchase. Mm-hmm. And there's no like, bodies fluctuate. It's totally fine, whatever your measurements are. And if you still don't know how something is going to fit, look at the measurements of something that fits you well at home, measure it, and then compare those measurements to what you see online to get a good idea of, hey, is this thing going to be a good fit for me? But modern measurements, words like small, medium, and large, or size 10, size 12, size 16, these are not industry standards. These words don't mean anything. You need to know what your actual measurements are.
Right.
I think what I would probably want to convey in this episode is that having a thing that you can do to make money without anybody else really can be a lifesaver. It can absolutely be something that gives you financial independence, whether you are someone just starting out, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, whether you want to have a career change, or whether you want to be the next best vintage seller on Instagram. Like, now is the time to learn how to do it. And I encourage anyone who wants to try to do it. There is readily available vintage or even not vintage out there. There are things you can buy and resell now and make a good living for yourself. Support your family, support yourself. Take yourself on a trip anywhere you want to go.
And there's zero shame in it. Don't worry about like the social constructs of like, oh, I didn't go to this college or that. And, I make my money this way versus that way. And it's not a job from an employer, with a desk. Or, it's something you kind of have to let go of too.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the wild, wild west right now in some ways with this particular market. There are a lot of people diving in and trying. A lot of those people will give up because it is not easy work. It takes a lot of dedication, and it does take a lot of time and effort, and it takes a lot of learning, and it takes, like we said, ethics and being responsible, but you can succeed in doing it. And there's just really a multitude of ways to succeed in reselling. And that's what makes it such an exciting industry and what makes it such an exciting topic to talk about on this podcast, because there are literally endless aspects of this business that can be discussed with all sorts of different types of people and how they do it. How I run my business is completely different than how someone else runs their business, but we're all seeing success. We're all selling things without a big boss breathing down our neck. And that feels really great.
Right. And not only that, you talking about this, you were saying that some people are pretty guarded, and it is important to, I think let people know that we're talking about finite resources, but it also seems kind of infinitely available to us to not worry about like the competition, knowing too much about how to do what you do. Everybody lives in their own town, in their own area. They're looking for their own things. I don't think there's any reason to feel like, well, what if the people in my area hear this and learn how to take the things that I was going to source?
Yeah, and I think that's why I mentioned that it's so important to have your own point of view, because just as an example, gunny sacks. You have people who their entire resale business is gunny sacks. That's all they buy and resell. And, I did that for a while. I was like, I want to get a piece of this gunny sacks pie.
These are like backpacks that you put all your arms in.
Gunny sacks dresses. And so, I found a few and I sold a few, but ultimately at the end of the day, gunny sacks is not my vibe. I like it. It's great, but it's not the thing that like gets me excited. And it's like, yeah, let those people have their gunny sacks. I have my thing that I want to sell. And you might be the only person in your town who wants to sell, I don't know, vintage Tupperware, or maybe you want to sell old wallpaper, or maybe you want to sell 1920s ties or whatever. Like, as long as you're finding your thing, you don't have to really worry about the competition. It's like you're doing your own thing. You're not looking at somebody else's shop being like, ooh, they're selling old denim. I'm going to jump in and sell old denim. You're not going to sell old denim as well as they're selling old denim. That's their thing. Find your own thing.
I'm going to write that down as its own subject matter too, because, you know, there are things that I've gotten interested in and think, oh, wow, there's definitely like a market out there for, I don't know, old belt buckles or like you said, vintage ties. And it's like, there's so many old ties at thrift stores that a lot of these kind of things that you have to maybe find out the hard way by experimenting, whether it's going to.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's when you get into like looking up comps online and seeing like, what are things selling for, and really thinking about like the investment of your time and energy into a thing. If you're buying a tie for $1 and then you have to measure it and then you have to make sure it's clean and then you have to photograph it and list it, how many hours is that taking? And then you sell it for $10, probably not
$6 shipping.
Right. Plus shipping or shipped. It's probably not the best investment of your time. So you're wondering why there's a lot of vintage ties at the thrift store? Well, that might be why.
And by looking up comps, you mean what?
Price comparing. So seeing what things are currently selling for, or if you have the ability to see what things have previously sold for. There are some apps that you can look at what something sold for on Etsy or eBay, like sold things, and kind of gauge how much things are going for.
You basically mean like you're at the thrift store and you find something that looks interesting, so you pull out your phone and literally just kind of Google it or look at it in different apps.
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that. Step out of the aisle while you're doing it. Do not block. I really hate when people are blocking the aisle to look up, you know, price compare online. But yeah, you can do that and just like see if that thing is, you know, if people are selling it, if you're, you know, and then sometimes it might be that you don't find it at all online and you're like, oh, well, maybe this is a rare thing that deserves to be online that I should invest my time in.
Right.
And I've definitely bought things over the years and been like, never doing that again, because it either stuck around for a million years or it was expensive to ship, or, you know, you're going to buy things that you end up being like, yeah, I don't want to do that again. I don't tend to Google while I'm thrifting, but when I get home, I look up brands and I check things out, and, you know, sometimes I'm super surprised and sometimes I'm kind of like, you know, just try to get my money back. And that's just part of it.
You've got enough experience and knowledge base where you can really kind of use the force and your own brain and eyes, and someone like me who's starting out, I'm really not sure if it's a good investment or not until I just Google it in the store.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and what I'm trying to really drive home is this information is readily available out there for anyone. This isn't like some super kept secret of how to do this or how to price things or how to find the value of things. Like, it's all online, and all you have to do is just like start asking questions, typing into Google, you know, looking up other people's listings. There is just so much for people to look at and read about. And the more you can do that, the better.
Well, that's a great place to wrap it up, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about and go deeper dives on each of these subjects. You know, we should make sure people know where to find you, and if they have any questions, where would be the best place to maybe ask questions?
I think the best place to really find me and where I'm super active is on Instagram, and you can DM me. So I'm Irreverent Finery on Instagram, and feel free to DM me. You know, comment. And then my Etsy shop is